Hey K-Poppers, and welcome back to Hallyu. It's time for another deep dive, and today we're going to talk about an absolutely unbelievable comeback trilogy from IU that spanned fiction and real life. The three comebacks span 8 years, and guys, I'm telling you, the story they tell will leave you speechless. IU's artistic genius is on full display here, and it's almost an insult to say that these are just songs. We'll start by talking about each comeback on its own. First, the song You and I, then Above the Time, and then Blueming. Then we'll dig more into their collective meaning and finally connect the dots to IU's real life. So without further ado, let's dive right in. IU released her album Last Fantasy on November 29, 2011, and the lead single on that album was the song You and I. The general story here is that of a young girl's forbidden love with an older man and her desperate attempt to be with him. At the beginning of the video, we see that IU lives in a clock tower which she inherited from her grandfather. A man who she's in love with, played by actor Lee Hyun-woo, is in a deep sleep in the tower with her. One day, IU discovers from her grandfather's notes that Hyun-woo will wake up when she becomes an adult. So she starts working on a way to travel to the future when she will be an adult so that she can be with him. We can see that IU is counting down to December 31st, and that she's working on some sort of mechanical device to travel into the future. And note the cute pet goose who stays by her side. This goose is actually a very important piece of the story, so let's remember it for later. We then see that IU peers into a train called the Fantasy Express, and she sees her future with Hyun-woo. Her strong desire to experience this forbidden love can be seen by how she covers her face and eyes, but she keeps looking anyways. We can also see this in the lyrics with IU saying, "Wait a little longer and wait for me, you and I, it can't be yet." Finally, the time has come, and she draws a clock on Hyun-woo's wrist, set to 12:20, as a reminder for him when he wakes up. Interestingly, we can see the clock tower is set to 12:05, so indeed she is traveling forward in time. IU gets into the time machine and she sets the final gear in place, and the machine whirs to life. The lyrics confirm IU's plan and her hope for the future, saying, "I'll be an adult in the blink of an eye, you'll probably recognize me, you'll probably remember me." Finally, IU fires up the machine and travels forward in time. We can see from the mechanism that she chose a date 8 years into the future, December 31st, 2019. Yet tragically, Hyun-woo wakes up just as she's leaving. The day she finally completed her invention to travel to the future and become an adult was the same day she actually did become an adult at 20 years of age. Thankfully though, as she's traveling to the future, Hyun-woo wakes up and catches a glimpse of her before she disappears. The intensity of IU's love for Hyun-woo is seen as she realizes that her contraption is working, and she just starts shedding tears of joy. The final lyric of this song then tells us this isn't a sure thing yet. IU says, "I don't know what day or what time, just in case, in the future in which you are present, if I'm lost, to help me recognize you, say my name." At the end of the video, we see Hyun-woo in a boutique store with a watch on the wrist where IU had drawn the clock previously, and the time on that watch is 12:20. IU is now an adult and is working as the store attendant. You can even see she has a goose decor piece on the desk just like the goose in the past. Hyun-woo retrieves his purchase, and as he's leaving, he realizes it's her. They both begin to smile ever so slightly, showing that they know they've finally found each other and they can be in love together after all that time. Now, the story of You and I was beautiful and compelling, but IU's comeback Above the Time from last November is where the story really gets interesting. The music video opens with a calendar and the date December 31st is circled. It becomes very obvious this is a sequel to You and I, as the beginnings are very similar. We see clocks, the same train, and pictures on the wall, but this time those pictures are of Hyun-woo, not IU. Hyun-woo is the one working on a mechanical device now, and we also see that IU is examining a model house. If you look closely, you can see that this house actually has sides that are the same as the Fantasy Express train, as well as the store where they finally met in You and I. As Hyun-woo looks back on his wrist, he sees the clock IU drew again, and it's obvious that both IU and Hyun-woo are once again separated somehow and trying desperately to get back together. Then we see something that tells us that they're getting closer to each other. Hyun-woo starts pouring water and it goes into IU's cup. Likewise, we see IU pull a goose feather and drop it onto Hyun-woo's desk. Somehow, these two are connected and they're getting closer to a reunion. The lyrics give us a hint as to what's happening, telling us, "When we finally meet, if we can stand outside the borders of time without stepping on the past, I will dance till I run out of breath." In fact, the song's name in Korean more literally means outside of the time, and we're beginning to understand that these lovers can only be together at the right time and place in another realm. And let's just talk about this goose again for a second. The goose is actually with Hyunwoo now. The goose with IU is just a stuffed animal. This is because the goose didn't travel through time in UNI. It was left behind in the clock tower with Hyunwoo when IU traveled through time, and he's been taking care of it ever since. This also explains why the goose at the boutique store was a wooden carving, not the real goose. We can also see from the lyrics how IU has grown up after traveling to the future, as she says, "Let's happily meet. You don't need to find me right away, because I will recognize you. I haven't forgotten. Even in my dreams I couldn't forget. Even in my sleep, I will call out your name." She will be the one to recognize him now, to call out his name, instead of her wanting Hyunwoo to say her name as she did in You and I. Hyunwoo begins realizing how close they are to each other, and so instead of waiting, he takes control of his own destiny and moves the clock forward to 12:20, the right time according to his wrist. Their houses start shaking and they're transported to some place outside time and space. At last, they're together again and they dance together and soak up every moment they can. IU also says it's time to start writing the first lines of their story together, and she draws a rose on Hyunwoo's hand in blue ink. We then see Hyunwoo alone and sad, and we quickly understand why. He looks down at his wrist and the clock is now gone. Their otherworldly meeting, that fleeting moment of happiness, has passed. We can also see the chalkboard from You and I that Hyunwoo kept from the tower, and Hyunwoo then drops a ladder down to IU. We can see her reaching for it as the video ends, and then we hear the same music from the start of You and I. Now, creating two releases so intricately connected 8 years apart is already unbelievable, but IU did not stop there. Believe it or not, Blueming also continues this story. Now, what happens at the very beginning of this video? IU's in bed and the room begins shaking, just like in Above the Time, and we know that IU and Hyunwoo are close together again. This also fits the theme of messages and chat bubbles that are in the lyrics, as it's like a vibration for a new message on her phone. IU immediately realizes what the shaking means, and she quickly runs to the mailbox. What does she find? A blue rose. A blue rose like the one she drew on Hyunwoo's hand in Above the Time. And look at the balloon IU is observing that says "Read Me." The very letters on this balloon are made up of the roses, just like the one she drew on Hyunwoo's hand. We then see several explosions of notes and messages, and it becomes clear that IU and Hyunwoo have found some sort of way to communicate more regularly with each other. You can also see the butterfly frame on the wall in IU's house is just like the one in Hyunwoo's place in Above the Time, so they're able to send objects and gifts to each other as well. IU then begins painting a blue rose to send back to Hyunwoo, and the symbolism is perfect. Blue roses do not exist in nature, and they're known as a symbol of unattainable love. What better way to represent their love for each other? We also get a reference in the lyrics where IU says, "It's our own secret garden," clearly referencing the shared space they had in Above the Time, which was overflowing with flowers. IU delivers her gift to Hyunwoo, and we see a light-hearted back and forth with perhaps some playful bickering between the two. She tells us in the lyrics, "Maybe this is the climax of the relationship. Before it goes over to Act 2, this is good timing." Once again referring back to Above the Time where she was ready to write their first lines. So it becomes clear that IU and Hyunwoo's love has blossomed more and more since their last meeting. IU then starts to get sad when nothing comes back in the mail from Hyunwoo, but then she sees lots of blue roses start blooming. Get it? Blueming? And she becomes optimistic about seeing each other again. In fact, she starts getting ready for a date and trying on several outfits and walks over to the fence that separates them. You can see just how much they've been talking by all of the blue roses that they've previously exchanged on this fence. Finally, they release their balloons, showing that they're done communicating remotely and they're ready to meet each other in person once again. Okay, so there's obviously a lot to unpack here. Between these three songs, IU has crafted an incredibly intricate, beautiful story, and although I've gone into a lot of detail describing the story in each MV, let's connect some more of the dots. In You and I, when IU peers into the Fantasy Express, we're actually learning that IU can see other points in time. In this case, she saw the future with Hyunwoo. In fact, IU in real life even confirmed this is why her character in You and I is able to build a time machine in the first place. She sees Hyunwoo working on the device in the future in Above the Time, and imitates him in the past in You and I, in order to build the time machine herself. We also know that IU and Hyunwoo are living in different dimensions, different realities, yet there's some sort of a connection between them. Despite existing in a different time and space, IU's abilities allow them to meet when the time and the place are right, symbolized by the time 12:20 on the watch. Again, in real life, IU has actually shared that the story does have an ending to their meeting in Above the Time, but that she decided to intentionally leave it out to allow people to interpret the story in several ways. To me, this makes this quite special because it also opens up the story to teach us a lesson about life in general, that we should cherish our memories but perhaps not spend all of our waking time obsessing over getting back to those good times. Life is passing by nature, and we should live in the moment and enjoy every second that we can, like IU and Hyunwoo did when they were together. Now, believe it or not, the connections don't stop there. This incredible story actually transcends the songs themselves, and it comes into the real world. And to me, this is the most awe-inspiring part of this all. These 3 releases combine to tell IU's actual real-life story. I know that sounds crazy, but I'm about to show you how. First off, in 2011 when IU released You and I, she was 19 years old, just like her character in the video, who was anxiously trying to turn 20 and become an adult so that she could be with her lover. IU was naive and wanting to rush into love, despite being too young and not really understanding what love was or even how to truly love someone. This is made plainly obvious when you consider that at age 20, in real life, she began dating Chang Ki-ha, who was 31 years old at the time, a difference of 11 years. IU was literally living out her story in You and I. Then we fast forward 8 years to just about the start of December 2019, when Above the Time was released. Did you catch that? December 2019. The date to which IU traveled in You and I. IU actually waited for the time to pass in real life for it to be December 31st, 2019 to release this sequel. The very fact that she called her own sequel 8 years into the future is insane. And in Above the Time, the most important scene is actually near the end when Hyunwoo extends the ladder for her to climb out of her boat. Notice that in this boat she's rather isolated and protected, and that everything is covered in sheet music. But it's not just any music, it's the music for her song Last Fantasy, the other single on the same album as You and I from 8 years ago. This scene is a metaphor for how music protected IU when she was younger, but now it's becoming a barrier to her being in love. You can actually check out my deep dive about IU that I made before to learn how music saved her from poverty as a child. I'll make sure to link that in the description below. Now that IU is successful and established in real life, her busy schedule is actually causing problems in her relationships and in her attempts to find love, and we can see Hyunwoo providing the lifeline to escape that reality at the end of Above the Time. Finally, in Blueming, we see current day IU reflected in her character. She has found a balance in her life and is able to spend time sending Hyunwoo gifts and messages. And remember how IU said that she wanted to write the first lines of their story as well as Act 2? Well, IU's real life name, Ji-ni, is the same word for author. She's literally the author by her very name in real life. At the end of Blueming, she finally says goodbye to the distance and shows that she's ready to be with him in person. This is IU in real life saying that she has found a balance in her life, and that while her unending focus on her music career served as a protection in the past, she's now moving forward in a more even-handed way so that she can fall in love and be with someone she cares about. You and I, Above the Time, and Blueming are all great songs sung by a talented artist, but they're so much more than that. They tell a story of forbidden love and heartbreak that traverses time and space over the course of 8 years in real life. They're incredibly detailed, and they're crafted with symbolism, metaphors, and intricate details that build up to an astonishing work of art. And to top it all off, they're also IU telling us her personal journey growing up, becoming an adult, and learning what love is. There should be no doubt in your mind by now. IU is an artistic genius, and these songs are a collective masterpiece that tell a compelling love story that transcends reality, fiction, time, and space. Alright guys, that concludes this week's deep dive. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you consider checking out more of IU's work if you haven't already. She's truly an international treasure. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive, guys, and be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future stories like this from the world of K-pop. Do you want to be an honorary producer credited in these videos? Maybe join a video hangout and get a personal K-pop video message every month? How about your very own deep dive? All that's available when you support my work on Patreon, and it would mean a lot to have you guys there. This has been Deep Dive number 14, IU's Unbelievable Trilogy.